You're all welcome to sit in the front here too. If you're floor people, you're welcome.
Well, first of all, thank you everybody for coming tonight to celebrate the launch of Doug's latest book, Present Shock. I think Doug has been giving lots of talks about the book that I've seen just in the last few days, and so to start us off, I think we just are going to get to it. Briefly, just to contextualize, Doug and I have known each other for a few years. I helped him do the research on Present Shock, and he's now a blogger at The New Inquiry in addition to all of his other accomplishments. And so, Doug, can you just tell us what Present Shock is?
Yeah, I can. Mm-hmm. Well, first, thanks everybody for coming and being here in person and sharing your time. And in some ways, I think the most radical thing about the book Present Shock is that it's a book at all. You know, a book is kind of anachronistic, and so is gathering in a bookstore. In an age when everything does seem to happen now, Present Shock is really about the human reaction to living in a world that is occurring in real time in an always-on fashion. And it's really about the confluence of two things that are interrelated and mutually supporting. You know, one of them is just having reached the end of the millennium, the end of the industrial age. You know, we kind of sped up as much as we could. We leaned into the future as frantically and with as much anticipation as was really humanly possible. You know, as Y2K approached, you know, KLM grounded their airline fleet in fear that the changeover was going to down their planes because the computers wouldn't be able to handle the switch in digits. We got 9/11, which was also a huge kind of break in continuity. We had the dot-com boom booming along right around 2000, and then in February and March, all of a sudden people stopped thinking about what are my investments going to be worth someday, and what are they worth right now? And all of a sudden they realized they're worth nothing and sold them, and the stock market crashed. There was this sort of leaning forward, this, you know, in an homage to Toffler, there was this sense of future shock, of things changing. In the 90s, we're just leaning into the millennium, going forward, and then we kind of got there. So there's that sort of moment of pause where we went, wait a minute, we're actually here. We're in the future everyone was describing. That happened at the same time that we changed from a kind of an analog industrial age mechanical society into this digital society. And you know, the real difference occurred to me when I was at Disney World a few weeks ago on our vacation, and there was this little girl standing on the line, and it said like 90 minutes until Goofy, you know, how long you have to wait to get to the thing. And she looked up at her dad and she said, "What's a minute?" And I thought, that's an interesting question. You know, in the last era, in the last century, a minute on a nice round clock face is a portion of an hour. And an hour is a portion of a day. It's the way we break up the cycles of our planet, of our day, of our lives. In a digital reality, a minute is not some portion of something else. It's a duration. It's like an absolute. It just sits there. You know, when my dad replaced my alarm clock when I was a kid, he replaced my analog alarm clock with a digital alarm clock, and my life changed. You know, I used to sit there at night watching the second hand go around, and I would think, oh, we're in a fresh minute. You know, oh, it's, 9:02. We're getting around now toward the bottom. Oh, we're halfway through that minute. Now we're in the tail end of that minute. It's the second half. And we're starting, now we're moving to 9:03. It's getting closer and closer. It's 9:03. Here, a fresh new minute, a new day. Then I got my digital alarm clock, and it was the old kind with the sort of railroad sign numbers that flip down, and it's like 9:02, 9:03, and each minute was no longer this thing that was moving towards something else. It was just this thing in itself. Each minute was just paused, right? So Present Shock for me is largely, it's dealing with that. It's dealing with the fact that time now feels suspended. And in each one of these moments, thanks to digital technology, there's this sort of sense of infinite choice of all these different things that we could be doing. Oh my gosh, my Twitter feed and my SMS and my Facebook updates and my this and my that. This sense of constantly being pinged by all these different things. The irony in it is when we're trying to keep up with all of these digital manifestations of the moment, we actually lose track of the moment that we're in. Not to get too Zen Buddhist on you, but we're actually here now, and we're so busy trying to keep up with these devices and these things and all these pings, when in reality, those pings are just trying to keep up with us. So present shock at its simplest is this futile effort to try to keep up with time, and we lose track of timing, of the real timing that we're in. It's sort of the difference between what the Greeks would call chronos, which is time with the clock, and kairos, which is timing. And that real difference is sort of like, what's the best time to tell Dad you crashed the car? Is it 5:02? Is it 5:03? No, it has nothing to do with time. It has to do with timing. It's after he had his beer, but before he opened the bills, right? And that's the kind of time that humans are in if we're alive and aware of what's actually going on around us. So, as I looked at the society that we're in, I realized that there are these various ways in which we are in present shock rather than the present, right? I do believe there's been a shift from a society that leans forward, from a mechanical industrial age society that is very goal-oriented and industrial-oriented. Even the money we use has a clock in it, right? It's lent out at interest. You have to pay it back over time. All of our businesses are racing to get bigger and bigger and bigger because they have to pay back their debt structures. There's that sense, but there could be a liberation from all that as we move into a digital reality, right? There's sort of this all the time in the worldness to a digital life that we could embrace if we weren't so busy trying to catch up with it. So I really looked at sort of the 5 ways, and I kind of called them like syndromes through which we experience present shock, through which we exercise that. And the first one is really simple. I called narrative collapse. And the idea there is that in a presentist society, it's very hard to tell a story, to even follow a story, to live by the story, right? Stories is what we've been using really since Aristotle's time or before to share our values, to make our points, right? It's goes back as far as the Bible and Greek tragedy and comes all the way up to the Oxy 5 commercial, right? Where the girl's going to go to the prom, but she's got a zit, and she pops her zit, and it gets worse. We go up the inclined plane of tension, and she tries all these things until finally she finds the Oxy 5, and she puts it on, and then she's relieved, and she can go to the prom, and we can be relieved because we've watched this character go into tension and then finally relax. Right? Except now with digital devices, with remote controls, with DVRs, with VCRs, with pause buttons and changing the channel, we don't have to sit through that narrative anymore, especially if we don't trust the storyteller. I don't trust the advertiser. Right? So what do? We go away. We leave the story before it's even reached that peak. Right? So stories, this whole notion of striving towards a goal, whether it's capitalism or communism or Christianity, you're going to do these great things so that you get good in the afterlife. We're going to have this sort of ends justifies the means journey to some goal no longer really makes sense. Not when we've worked for a company and then they crash our pension before we get it. Not when we vote for Obama and then we were the thing we were waiting for. Wait a minute, where's the us part of this? It's back to something as usual, right? So without stories, it's very easy to feel rudderless, right? We don't have a goal. We don't have a sense of anything. But I do think that there are some inklings of presentist alternatives to narrativity, to narrative collapse. I mean, one of them, an easy one, we were just talking about this before, is the Occupy movement. Right? So people were so unnerved and unsettled by the Occupy movement because they wouldn't state their demands. They wouldn't state their goals. Well, what is it you want? Well, we're doing it right now. Well, what are your demands? We're not really demanding anything from you. We're not doing this for something else. We're doing this, right? It's a sort of an internet-style political movement, right? In that it's not part of some great narrative about winning a war or fighting something and